our first presenter today is Purity Muthoni, who comes to us from Kenyatta University, Purity, in Nairobi, Kenya. And Purity here at Michigan is working with Professor Larissa Larson and also Martin Murray, both from the Taubman College of Architecture and Urban Planning. Purity? So Purity, I will be sitting there. Teye stands in the back. He has the time card, so he'll show you the 10-minute, 5-minute, and stop.
So, good afternoon. Thank you for the introduction, Andres. And welcome to my presentation. It's on environmental sustainability in informal settlement projects in Kenyan cities. And I'd like to start the presentation by positioning my research area. Broadly it falls within the field of urban planning, where we predominantly have 3 domains: the spatial planning, environmental planning, and urban policy. So my focus or my area of interest is environmental planning, which focuses or concerns itself with sustainability in emerging and existing urban areas, and also redevelopment, regeneration, and renewal and upgrading spaces. So my research is based on the realization that one of the key defining phenomena of our time is rapid urbanization. And at the moment, or currently, 56% of the world population is living in urban areas, and this is projected to increase to 66%. So by the year 2050. So this is very consequential in developing countries, where the rate of urbanization far outpaces our investment in urban infrastructure, and especially housing. And in that case, most of the low-income residents in urban areas will find themselves in areas that are highly deprived, and this is majorly what we call the informal settlements. And it has been reported that in sub-Saharan Africa, we have 59% of urban residents residing in informal settlement, and this is of course projected to also rise to 70%. So as a result of this, and before we look at that, we can appreciate the map. If you look at the coloration, you will be able to appreciate some of that the challenge is mainly in some regions, particularly in the African region. And as a result of this, of course, the government and non-state actors have taken action, and they have intensified their efforts to improve living conditions through what we call the informal settlement upgrading projects. And this is where my interest is, that upgrades have the potential to influence environmental sustainability in cities, because of the intense, or rather the concentrations of many people in a small space, and therefore it allows for intense consumption and waste generation, which, if not well managed, would create health hazards and environmental degradation, which would affect the ecosystems that support the well-being of urban residents. So, they also provide economies of scale in provision of services, and a platform through which environmental practices can be propagated. And therefore, as cities strive towards realization of sustainable cities and human settlements in the SDG 11 and the climate change goals, it will be important for the informal settlement upgrading projects to respond to this challenge. The research is founded on a theoretical framing of urban metabolism theory, and it assumes that the processes within a social system, such as a residential area, compared to those of biological functions of an organism. And from this perspective, it will therefore imply that the environmental sustainability is attained when the inflows of materials and energy resources within a system and the generation of waste remains within the carrying capacity of the urban ecosystem. So what is the Kenyan case? We have a vibrant informal upgrading program that was initiated in 2004 To date, 39 settlements have been upgraded in 3 Kenyan cities, and the interventions are mainly twofold: redevelopment and in situ upgrading, which involves provision of infrastructure, but the redevelopment involves relocation of residents and construction of new housing estates. So the research set out to investigate the environmental sustainability performance of 11 upgraded settlements in 3 Kenyan cities. And this is how the distribution, or rather the study area, was distributed within the cities. So in Kisumu, I picked 4 settlements. Kisumu is a lake city. Nairobi is the capital city. Nairobi is the capital city, and then we have Mombasa, a coastal city along the Indian Ocean. And this is what has been happening within the arena of slum upgrading. We can see what redevelopment has shaped, how it has shaped the new housing estates from the former informal settlements to what is currently now the new estates. So this is where upgrading has involved in situ upgrading, and basically just provision of a very wide range of infrastructure without disturbing the residents. The methodology that was used for this particular research was deriving environmental performance assessments. A list of 16 indicators was developed, and this was identified from a multiple set of indicators that have been used previously to assess environmental sustainability. And what would be familiar to us here in the US is one that is called the Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design for Buildings or Neighborhoods. And many other metrics or many other lists of indicators were used. Against each of the indicators, I identified the metrics for measurements and, of course, the threshold against which I determine whether a settlement is performing well or not. And then finally, I use the comparative performance rating. This helps to identify, to reveal patterns, and also identify causal factors that may be influencing some of the environmental outcomes within the settlements. And I will present findings. And just to mention that data was collected from 600 households, and this was augmented by key informant interviews and focus group discussions. My findings will majorly focus on one of the domains, that is resource consumption. I also looked at other domains on waste management, environmental quality, and community organization. But for purposes of this presentation, I'll only highlight findings related to resource consumption, where I have 5 indicators relating to waste, energy, and use of non-motorized transport. So looking at water consumption in these 11 settlements, I established that the interventions were wide in range, and they involved connections of water into dwelling units, provision of service mains that would allow people to gradually connect water to their plots and eventually into their dwelling units, and then provision of standpipes which would allow for communal water access. And the average consumption level at the moment is, or previously was 29 liters per capita per day. And after the upgrading, this has risen to 31 liters per capita per day. Just to bring you to par, the World Health Organization minimum recommended amount is 50 liters per capita per day. And so, of course, we can appreciate even from the chart that none of the 11 settlements has attained the 50 liters per capita per day. So again, though the consumption is highly low, the variations within the settlements could give us pointers into what factors are affecting these levels of consumption. So at the settlement level, I realized there was a variation in terms of performance. And of course, I imagine this variation would be because the interventions were varied. But looking at settlements that received the similar interventions, they also exhibited variation. So therefore, it means that the intervention does not significantly influence the amount of water that a household consumes. So at the city level, I realized there are significant difference in means among settlements in different cities. So then this could point out to city level factors that influence consumption. And of course, one of the main elements that came out was the capacity of utility. Being a service that is citywide, then of course the capacity of different utilities in different cities affect the level of consumption. Then at the household level, the socioeconomic characteristics did not demonstrate any association with water consumption apart from household size and housing tenure. And household size would, of course, because of the number of people that are in a given household, the more likely the mean is going to be around. About the housing tenure, it almost implied that people who own houses were able to have more money or have better access to the service, probably because they were not using their money for rent, so they have some money that they could use for other services. Then water conservation, then I noted there's quite a range of practices that have been adopted for water conservation. And they range from water recycling, rainwater harvesting, installation of water-saving devices. And one that I didn't want to pick, but it kept coming out from the residents, was reduced frequency of laundry activities. The average is quite impressive at 83% of the households have adopted one or more conservation practices, and the range is between 61 to 95. There is no significant variation between settlements and cities, and only one household characteristics exhibits any correlation with conservation, and that is the household size. And then the correlations with very specific practices, one was established, which is the water-saving devices, was highly correlated with income, of course, because the devices are highly costly and they would only be affordable to those with high incomes. So this is quite impressive for anyone with an environmental interest, but I realized that it is not what it looks like. So I wanted to establish exactly what would be motivating some of these practices, some of the practices. And I established there seems to be a very direct proportional relationship between people who are conserving water and people who had reported water intermittency to be the preeminent factors that was affecting the water consumption levels. So then it appears that the water conservation measures are primarily for water scarcity coping rather than the inherent environmental values. The program exhibits very minimal efforts to promote water conservation in the sense that in some settlements they have adopted standard billing systems in that whatever amount of water you consume, you will still pay the same bill. This disincentivizes conservation. Then there's also a lot of omission of roof catchment and on-site recycling systems, which is contrary to the building code and environmental regulations. Then energy conservation, I looked at the connectivity to the grid and consumption levels. So a very impressive 89.6% of the households are connected. Previously, before the upgrading, it was 42, and a good range of 100 to 67%. So this is quite impressive because it appears that there are settlements that are even fully covered by the grid. But what happens when we look at the consumption levels, we realize that the average is at 36 kilowatts per hour, and the national average is 161. So the consumption level is highly dependent on your appliances as a household. But research has shown that if the consumption is way too low, then it may be exhibiting some inadequacies in the use. So it means that people are connected to the electricity, but they're not using it for whatever factors. So given this national average, and never mind that I checked the US average, it's at 800. So I don't know where we are if this is 161 in Kenya. But the consumption levels show correlations with, or do not show correlations with many of the characteristics of the household, especially education and incomes, but there is another correlations with the housing tenure. Again, because of course, people who own the houses are not using or probably have more money to use on some of these services. This is an indication, the low level of use is an indication of continued reliance on cheaper sources, especially kerosene and candles, which predisposes the users to indoor pollution, despite the high level of coverage. So some of the misses within the program is that it has not been able to develop programs that can mobilize the utility to subsidize for the low-income settlements, and there is also limited promotion of alternative sources of energy. Energy efficiency, that 88% of the households have adopted one or more energy conservation practices. And settlements, all 11 settlements do not show any significant variations in their means. And cities show some significant variation. Of course, if we look at this chart, then we can appreciate that one of the cities, that is Kisumu, has a very high level of households who have adopted one or two measures for energy conservation or adopted a renewable energy. This was attributed to the prevalence of renewable energy programs within these cities. And then energy conservation in relation to household characteristics, there were no relations apart from income, which was a negative correlations. As incomes increase, people have a lesser tendency to consume. And then finally, the last indicator is non-motorized transport. So I looked at how people are likely to walk or cycle using market as a reference point. So then I realized that 57%, more than half of the population, was using non-motorized transport, while 43% was preferring to use motorized transport. So what factors would be influencing the use? At the settlement level, there was no significant difference, and probably this could be attributed to the uniform intervention of providing access routes and in all the settlements and footpaths. And then at the city level, there was significant difference. NMNT is widely used in one of the cities in Kisumu, and this was mainly because it is the only city, it is a city with a high rural influence, and it is the only city which predominantly uses cycling as a main public transport service. So that is why probably they were performing better in terms of the use of NMNT. Then with regard to household characteristics, there was only correlations with income. So as the income increases, then people are less likely to adopt these NMTs or non-motorized transports. So this is could be attributed to a perception towards walking and cycling as a depiction of poverty in developing countries. And of course, we realize that the use of non-motorized transport cannot be motivated by infrastructure only. We also need to address perceptions and other complementary facilities that would enhance walkability or cycling. As a conclusion is that environmental performance in upgraded settlements is quite low, and environmental considerations are minimal, they're inconsistent, they're ineffective, and they're highly disconnected from the wider network. So for purposes of future upgrading that we can realize better environmental sustainability outcomes, they need to look at 4 critical things. One is a system-based approach that will consider the network, the wider network of infrastructure and the factors that influence these infrastructures at a wider scale. And then, of course, it needs to be more participatory, because then the residents are better placed to understand what works best for them and what approaches will be best fit. And of course, they have to be responsive to environmental policies, and most importantly, they have to provide targeted education and awareness program, particularly because of the household characteristics factors that influence sustainability at the settlement level. And finally, this presentation is part of a manuscript that is due for submission. And researcher position and interest is that I grew up in one of the largest informal settlements in Nairobi, and I'm highly inspired by redevelopment projects because they offer a second chance to do what is right. I'm really thankful to UMAPS, especially the coordinating unit and my fellow UMAPS colleagues. Greatly indebted to my colleagues at Kenyatta University for taking up my load, and when I'm here, and the DAD for funding my PhD studies, and of course, most importantly, my family, especially my husband and my mom, who are taking care of my 2-year-old baby. Thank you. Thank you.
Do we have a spare? Do we have 2 of them? Do we have only 1? Thank you. Purity. That was perfectly timed. You were exactly on time. So we have time for some questions. And since we might have people on Zoom, or if not on Zoom, we're recording it, make sure you have the microphone when you ask your question.
Thank you so much, Purity, for your talk. I'm Osisipo Feleni from the University of South Africa in Johannesburg. So I think I've seen in one of your slides, you were talking about the SDG 11. But then now, as you're moving on, you were talking about energy, you're talking about water. Can you tell us about the synergy between the three SDGs? So you were talking about SDG 6, 7, and 11. What is the synergy there? And what are you trying to enforce to your students regarding the sustainability of the urbanization? Thank you.
Thank you for that observation. So I mentioned, you're right, I mentioned the SDG 11, which is an overarching objective for environmental sustainability issues. And of course, it links with many other SDGs. And when you're looking at environmental sustainability, we are looking at many domains. And that is why I mentioned that my study focuses on multiple domains: waste management, resource consumption, community organization, and environmental quality. All this will cover many other sub-SDGs and their targets. And therefore, what is most important to understand in environmental sustainability is that it also incorporates, or rather also touches on many other aspects of socio-economic elements that influence sustainability within a settlement. So I will not be strictly limited to ecological elements. I will also touch on many other elements of sustainability that relate to social and economic.
Thank you.
A follow-up question. What is the sustainability in urbanization? Can you explain more in that format?
The what?
This sustainability. You're talking about sustainability. What is it when it comes to urbanization?
So in urbanization, what we term sustainability to be, it is any system or condition or situation that enhances or allows the urban space to remain within its ecological carrying capacity. The ecological carrying capacity is influenced by multiple dimensions. It is influenced by economic activities, it is influenced by social activities, and it is also influenced by strictly what we call the ecological factors. So then if you have a balance of those multiple dimensions, if you can create a balance of those, then we are mentioning, or we are saying that you have realized urban sustainability, if you can be able to create a balance of those.
So I'm going to ask a question,
Yeah.
but there will be time for another question. And Purity, I want to push you a little bit into, and I know it's kind of an unfair question because you are on the environment side. I want to ask a question from the social side. So you've shown us those pictures of the estates that go up and how they compare to the informal settlements. And I wonder, what influence does that have on the society, on what the lives are of people who live there? Do the social ties get broken, or are they maintained as people move into these high-rise apartment blocks? What happens to the community?
So I will comment on that, but it was outside my scope. But of course, as I was talking to my respondents, they mentioned this. And there is an appreciation that these social ties have been broken because as people moved from these informal settlements and they went now into the modern housing estates, then you realize that there were certain connections that they had, either because of the close proximity or by the fact that they had lived with their neighbors for so long and established long-term relations, and therefore there were certain elements that were broken by the fact that they had moved to more modern estates where they could no longer relate as they used to. The distance was created, and of course there are certain boundaries, whether social or perceived or imaginary, there were boundaries that were created, and they can no longer associate as they used to. What happens, especially where you see the informal settlement and a new housing estate, is that these people in the new housing estate would say that they are not even accepted in the informal settlements, because those people are now saying that you have gone now to live in the rich areas, so don't come here now. And you see there are certain services they depend on, they were depending on in the villages where they're coming from, so they can no longer have that proper interaction, and of course that is costly socially and economically.
Savias.
Thanks, Andres. And thank you so much, Purity, for an interesting presentation. My name is Savias Oviroh. I am from the University of the Free State in South Africa. Your presentation is so close to my heart. Basically, I think it's because I teach development economics. So, and thank you so much, Andres, for bringing that picture, you know, right there. You can see the stark difference between the lives of the people. But my question is not going to be about the picture. It's basically going to be about the results that you presented. And I might have missed something. You talked about the water consumption and the electricity consumption. And I think you were comparing, you know, the amount of water that is being used, as well as the electricity consumption between the upgraded as well as those that are not yet upgraded. And at some places you were talking about no significant differences. I don't know if I'm right. My question now is, are you measuring your sustainability on the basis of the amount that is being used, or there should be actually better measures of sustainability? And the reason why I'm asking that question is this. The amount that is, the water that is being used, whether in an upgraded or not yet upgraded society, may actually depend on many other things. For instance, right now in South Africa, we have serious load shedding, electricity load shedding. So the amount of electricity that we use is not really based on, because it's not even there. It's not being availed. It's not being provided. And this is the case not just in South Africa. We have it in Zimbabwe as well, you know, where we go to a stage where whenever, you know, whenever the electricity is back, in fact, we have electricity less time than when we don't have electricity. In a day of 24 hours, maybe we have electricity for only 3 hours. So the amount that we use of electricity then is not explaining, you know, our sustainability in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia. So sustainability is a very difficult concept to measure because it's elusive, it's progressive. So you really have to tie it to something concrete. And as I said, I have used previously list of indicators that I used to measure sustainability. So that's where I drew my indicators from. Then when it comes to the measurement of whether a settlement has attained sustainability, it is not about what you were using before or what you're using now. It is more about the international standard that has been set. And that's why I mentioned when I was saying, talking about water consumption, I talked about the WHO 50 liters per capita per day, because that is an international standard that, as much as probably may not be adequate and debatable, but it is it gives us a standard. And of course we can appreciate that we have not gotten to the standard. And then I said there are some cases where we do not have a standard. For example, the electricity consumption, we have no standard. But what we use in such cases is the comparative assessment. I provided an average of the national average. That is 161 for electricity consumption. But what is currently used in the slums or in the upgraded settlement is 31. So then it feels like then we have not yet reached sustainability, not because we have a standard measure, but because comparatively this is way low. Whatever you're consuming now is way low. So that is, of course, some of the challenges and debates along measuring sustainability, but we have to use a metric. We have to find a metric, yeah.
So there is time for one more short question. Or medium length question, or long question. Going, oh, thank you.
So thank you for the really interesting talk. You mentioned solar power. Is that for electricity supply, replacing existing electricity supply, or introducing new electricity supply? What's the context of solar power there?
Yes, you're right. I mentioned solar power, and the context was in the sense that it could be used as an alternative source of energy where the electricity was too costly, but this was not being promoted. So it, of course, provides an alternative for us, but it's not being promoted within the program. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is there a kind of national scheme or something to make that affordable, solar power?
We currently don't have, and that's why I was very much interested in a previous talk that was given here on solar. We currently don't have programs to support subsidies for solar power. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Purity.
Thank you.
So I'm very happy to see the Aura fellows joined us. We'll do one more presentation and then I will say thank yous and quick introductions. So we'll take kind of a break in the middle for that. Our second presentation for today is from Peter Oviroh, who joins us here at University of Michigan from University of Johannesburg. And here at Michigan, Peter is working with Professor Panos Papalambros from the College of Engineering. Peter.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. Okay, my name is Oviroh Peter Ozaveshe. I'll be talking on a system design optimization model for integrated natural resource conservation and development, which we've tagged as INRCD in an agricultural community. And we look at the project now we're looking at is the micro, water, energy, and food nexus. Now, this is the outline of what I'm going to be discussing today. Now, a system approach that incorporates agriculture, irrigation, and energy is not too common. I'm very careful about that. Now, when I'm talking about that is optimization. We actually have water, food, energy nexus, but most times when you see it, they're at national level or regional level because of availability of data. But we tend not to have a lot of these at community level, which is where most things functions. And we decided to look as a group, the purpose of the INRCD project is to find the balance between development and conservation. We know that, okay, we need to grow the society. We need to provide activities in the economy so that people can have jobs. But also we have to find a way of conserving resources within the society and find a balance between those two, a part of things we are trying to do. And our approach is to develop a modular system design optimization framework which is suited for quantitative modeling and optimization. Now, I use the word quantitative because we have a lot of work out there that is qualitative, but we're looking at quantitative because we need to have data value that can easily attach to things that can help decision makers and policy makers in making decisions easily. And in trying to do that, things we look at is, we look at the society, agriculture, irrigation, and microgrid. Now, talking about the water, energy, and food nexus. Now, we know that we need energy for desalination, to pump water, to distribute water, which is done in most parts of the society. We also need water to provide energy, hydro, bioenergy, and things like that. And we also need water and energy to provide food, to also provide energy too. So the interaction of this is what we call the water, energy, food nexus, which is something that is very important. Now, why this nexus? One is we want to look at the issue of climate change is becoming a challenge, actually. One, the standard of living of people is growing every day. We have urban areas springing everywhere. We have the issue of energy consumption increasing and putting stress on energy resources. And also, if you look at water is becoming a scarce commodity or scarce resource. If you look at the MENA region, that's Middle East and North Africa. If you look at a lot of parts of Africa, we're having drought in several countries in Africa. If you look at the parts, even in America here, water has become a challenge. And also, one of the issues is that, okay, to produce food, we need a lot of fresh water to do that. And it said that about 70% of fresh water is used for irrigation, thereabouts, or agriculture. So now, there's need for us to look at how do we find interaction or find a balance between all these resources so that we can have a sustainable and acceptable economy. Now, what is the problem now? We look at it, okay, if I have, let's say, 4 acres of land, or 1 acre, or 2 acres, or 10 acres in an agricultural community, the question would be, okay, what kind of crops do you want to plant? Now, agriculture is something very common, which people do everywhere. And so the question is that, okay, we'll have the kind of plants we want to plant. How should we design the microgrid and also the irrigation system to provide the right amount of water and what amount of energy we need, the interaction, and then how do we find a balance between household needs and also construction need? And then at the end of the day, one most important thing is that this project we are looking at, is it going to be sustainable? Is it going to be profitable? Because if it's not going to be profitable, not going to be sustainable, then why do we have to invest into it? That's one of the things we're trying to look. And in doing that, we have an overall level system, which we call the Agric Energy INRCD system level flowchart. And in this flowchart, we have our input as a weather, our water source, and our household demand, which has to do with the energy and the water. And then at the end of the day, so we have our input as the fuel and the soil. At the end of the day, what will be our output is the yield and meeting the household demand. Now, the yield, because at the end of the day, the yield will give us the revenue which we need to calculate our profit. And I'm going to explain that more now. So now, in our system, we have 3 different subsystems. And the first subsystem is the food, which is also called the crop model, or subsystem 1. Then we have the water, and we have the energy. Now, in this food subsystem, we have the irrigation strategy and the selection, and the interaction of this with input as our weather, our temperature, our precipitation, our irrigation, and soil characteristics will help us give us the yield, which is one of the things that's more important for us. And then based on the crop demands, the water is supplied, and we have design of the piping and the pumping. And based on the demand from the pipe and the household, we have the energy or the microgrid system that provides the energy to power the piping and provide energy and water for the household. So the interaction of this 3 systems is our system, which we have the subsystem 1, subsystem 2, and subsystem 3. Now, what do we intend to achieve at the end of the day with this project? Part of what we intend to achieve is, 1, we want to develop a system that aligns with UN Sustainable Goals. Another one, we want to build an optimal irrigation system that have an interaction between the microgrid, the cultivation pattern, and also a model as a tool that people can use for decision. And on that one, we want to look at how do we look at the interaction between the subsystems I've talked about, which is the microgrid, the water, and the energy. And then talk about the design for varying weather conditions so that we can minimize total energy expenditure and also CO2 emissions. They want to provide data for community, which is one of the most important things, is to find a way of providing data for community leaders. Because at the end of the day, what we want to achieve is we have a system that can provide that can provide data that community leaders and policymakers can make decisions that will help the society. Sorry, please. Now, looking at our system now, we have several variables. As I said, at the end of the day, what we want to maximize is profits, which we get as a result of the revenue minus the costs. And these are some of the variables we have. Though we have other variables, but these are the major variables, which is the number of solar panels, the number of batteries, the generator size, the crop allocation, the size of the pump, the diameters of our piping system, and also the irrigation threshold. But in our system, we put in constraint because we can't really solve everything. We have to put in constraint in the system. And part of the constraint is one, that all the energy that is needed for the system is provided. Though we know that sometimes that might not really be what is applicable in real life, but for our system, we are assuming that all energy must be provided. 2, that the water use is less than the season limit. And 3, amount of budget is not exceeded in the process. Now, this is just an overview of how our system or the system optimization algorithm. We have the crop allocation, the pump design, and the microgrid, which are like our variables. And then these variables are fed into our different models, so the crop model, the irrigation model, the microgrid model, and the cost model. Based on all these inputs, we have our revenue and our costs that fed into our profit model, and we get our profit. And our revenue is as a result of the prices based on market values in the country we're looking at study. Now, this project is not something that started. It has been something that has been going on for a while, and they've done the version 1 and the version 1.1, and we are currently working on the version 2. And below are just some of the papers that have been published as regards this work. Now, the work, because it's quite it involves a lot of codes, we're not just using only codes developed within in-house. We have codes that we call legacy codes, and part of it is what we call the DIT. And this DIT is an incorporation of other legacy codes, which we call the AquaPro, which by the Food and Agriculture Organization, and also the soil water balance. And then we have for the microgrid, which the code we use is the high mode. And then we'll have the last weather generator, which helps us to predict the weather and also our evapotranspiration. And these are those sites to tell you about some of the sites for legacy codes and where we got our data for our weather. We got most of our data for weather in these 2 sites. Now, I said earlier that our objective is to maximize profit, and this is just an overview of the revenue calculation, which I'm going to dwell on. But I want to show you that in different models, we have different models I've worked on, which is like the OD, which is what we do here in Michigan. And then we have other models like the AquaPro, the high mode, and DIT, and the different places they find in the system and the model. Now, going deep into the different models, we have the structure of this irrigation subsystem. Now we have different dates. Sorry, you can see the date is different with those hypothetical dates. We have the crop, which we have maize, dry beans, rice, and soybeans, and we have the different seeding time and the harvest time, which are inputs, and with the irrigation threshold and the size pump fed into the AquaPro give us our yields as our output. Now, for the microgrid system, we have 3, for now, we're looking at batteries, solar panels, and diesel generator. Now we could decide to, actually working on it actually, to expand it to incorporate wind. And also we could look at the issue of applying incorporating national grid, which we're not doing now, but for the work we're doing currently, we restrict ourselves to these 3 energy sources. And we have a logic such a way that because we are talking about conservation and conservation of the environment, we try much as possible to ensure that, okay, when there's a logic selection, we have renewable energy, we have batteries, we have solar PV, then the batteries, and then the diesel generator comes at last, and our emissions are taken care in the model. Now this shows just the logic of our system, and we have the charging, at what time it charge, at what time the battery will discharge or provide energy, and at what time the diesel generator will come into play, a flow of the logic of our system. Now, in trying to implement this model, now we have to get real sites that we could use, and doing that, we decided to pick a site in Uganda where we have a physical data that we get data from sites with equipment we have over there. And in this Uganda, we decided to pick 3 places. We have Mbatudde, Kampala, and Gabon. Now, if you look at Kampala, tends to be close to places where we have water, and where there's a bit away. And Gabon, if you look at this place, it tends to be more drier compared to that part, and we decided to choose this one. And this is based on the different mean temperature which we've done, because if you look at these different sites, Kampala, Mbatudde, and Gabon, they tend to have different mean temperature over time that are varying for the different location. And also, if you look at the precipitation, we tend to have high precipitation in Kampala in the month of April, while for Mbatudde we have it more in October, and that for Gabon we have it in July. So we have different weather so that we can see how this system works together in different conditions. That's what we have done. And we ensure that we use the same country, because we don't want to we assume that the prices are similar in those different locations. So there won't be a bit of difference. Because we are looking at different countries, we might have to look at the metrics differently. And that's why we decided to do that for a country now. And in doing that, in our system, we will see, okay, the tank water, the household demand. Now we assume that the water that is used by household is constant, which is not really true in real life, because the water that you use in household changes. But because of our simulation and the work we're doing, we decided to make it constant for now. And then we have showing us the irrigation demand at every point in time for both seasons, and the pump activity, and also the energy, the met on met power, the battery charging and discharging, and also the load at every point in time. Now, based on some of the results we have acquired now, because every day we want to develop a decision tool that will help people in making decisions, which is what we are more important. Now, if you look at this graph now, based on the energy demand from the households and also the irrigation, you can see that we have more energy demand in Gabon, which is expected, than compared to Kampala and also Mbatudde. Now, what this implies that you can see that in places like Kampala, it's telling that you might not need to really invest much into that, because the energy demand is not too much. But if you look at places like Gabon, if you're going to produce amount of crops and make reasonable profit, that means we have to invest as regards energy in this part. So this will give us a clear picture of what we want to do and help us decision to whether look at, is it worth investing in this place or is it worth investing in the other place. Now, we try to just show some of the results. We have a lot of results actually, but I just have to just pick few to just drive home my point now. And the good thing about the system now, we're able to get the precipitation, evaporation, and which we get from the weather data actually of the different locations. Now, we also get what we call optimum point. Now, I'm careful about this optimum point because we're still fine-tuning the optimization, because in our system we are using the F-mean con, and we're trying to look at also the GA, but we're still working on it. But based on our system now, because the system works in a way that you have 4 crops, 2 for each season, and then decide to pick which crop is better or going to give you more profit. So if you look at this system now, what is decided that, okay, for season 1, all the crop picks decide to pick maize as what to give us more profit as regards than compared to beans. And also in the season 2, decide to pick paddy rice, give us more profit as compared to soybeans, and also give us the capacity of the generator you need to install on site. That's what the system gives to us. And also, we also have the water requirement. I told you that we assume that the water requirement is constant for the household. That's why I have see the value is constant. But we can also get the requirement for the different crops. Now you can see we have the household requirement for maize, give us the requirement. So what it helps is that it can help you to plan very well, to know what amount of water you need, and you can make projection as regards the work and make estimations. Sorry, please. So also as regards the energy, it gives you the amount of energy you rigged, and also not just that, it also gives you the yield per ton. So you can estimate based on best practices in agriculture. You can estimate what will be your yield, and you can estimate with your yield, you can estimate what will be the profit you're going to be getting in the system. And you can see this one, it's telling us, okay, as regards the system, we make more profit in Mbatudde when it comes to rice than compared to Gabon and Kampala. Now, this is also more on just a comparison between the three different locations. If you can see from the three comparisons, you see that as regards the farming size we've chosen and different crops we have chosen and the optimization, we tend to have more profit in Mbatudde compared to Kampala and Gabon. So that will help you to make decisions every day. So, okay, if I want to plant so crop, what would be best to plant in Kampala? What would be best to plant in Gabon? What would be best to plant in Gabon? You can make informed decision now. Unlike just going and doing trial and error. But with the simulation, we can predict a lot of things. We can predict the yield, we can predict the crop, we can predict the water requirement, we can predict the energy requirement, and you can make very, very informed decisions in the process. So in summary, the INRCD application can support future decision-making, leading sustainable use of resources, that's one. Two, the development model can be used in conjunction with human-centered design method to design sustainable development project that maximize profit for local community while minimizing resource use. And the tools are particularly applicable in places like Africa, where we're trying to conserve resources and also meet needs. And most importantly, we can look at the integration of this system, water, energy, food, not just at national and regional level, but also at community scale. And this project is like we keep modifying it, improving it, because at the end of the day, we want to build a decision tool. That's what we want to do. And part of the thing we are doing, okay, we want to integrate into it what we call the social benefit or social impact. What it means that, okay, if we decide, okay, we have an environment, how will the project affect the society? How will it improve the life of people there? What will be the impact? How do you measure those metrics? We want to input all those things into our system and see how that will help for leaders and community leaders to make decisions as regards our project. We'll talk about diversified livelihood, and we hope to also extend this project to other parts of Africa. So thank you all. I really want to appreciate everyone. Thank the University of Michigan. It's really a privilege and a life-changing one. I'm really grateful for that. I want to thank the African Studies Center, led by Andres. We're grateful for this privilege. I want to thank the Optimal Design Lab, which is the lab I'm working with, led by Professor Panos Papalambros. He's my host here. He's a very great man, and I'm really, really grateful for opportunity to learn under him and grace and opportunity to lead the project at this time. It's really a learning curve for me and a time to really work with a lot of people in the team, people like Prof. Jez, Jonathan, and several other colleagues in the group. I'm really grateful. And I want to thank the University of Johannesburg that gave me the opportunity to come, or through the school I came to this program. I also want to thank my research group in the University of Johannesburg. Then I also want to thank my UMAPS fellow. Thank you, all of you. You really made this stay a worthwhile. I have friends now, I have family members now, I can call it. I also thank my family, some of them that are watching, my wife and my daughter. They actually sacrificed a lot for me to be here, more than 5 months. I'm really grateful for everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Peter. So we have time for 2 or 3 questions. Diana, and then one of our Aura students, and then Pierre.
Thank you, Peter, for such a wonderful presentation. I have one question on particularly the places you've chosen to do the project, and that is on Kampala. What informed your decision to choose Kampala, considering that it's mainly an urban area, and the cultivatable land mass might actually be less than 10% of the whole place? So why would such a project be instituted in an urban area when you're looking at, when I think of irrigation, I start thinking of a large kind of cultivatable land. Anyway, what informed your decision to choose Kampala per se?
Now, the thing is that we have some people are working with, I think, University of, sorry, I'm not sure of the university. We're working with people in Uganda, in some of the universities, and they give us information on where we could use. Actually, the project started with Mbatudde. That's where the project started, actually. A lot of data we are getting from there. We also have a fiscal system that weather data that we get with the data from there. But we decided, okay, since we want to extend, we want to have different environments. We know that Kampala is actually like this, I think, the capital of the country. But we're also looking at, okay, if we have a project that has to do with maybe people interacting, or maybe not just farmers, but have different livelihood, what will happen? So we decided to pick Kampala again, because maybe we don't know geography very well, but if you look at Kampala, the kind of weather conditions is a bit different from what we have in Mbatudde and what we have in Gabon. And that's why we decided to pick that kind of location to just see how this interaction would be for different locations.
And we have a question here.
Thank you. My name is Colloquium from Aura Program, and I would like to ask why, and I would like to ask for your project, how does it fit with the regions which are out of the swamps and the wrecks? So does the project fit with those areas, and if yes, what about the energy resource which will be required to take water from the swamps and wrecks to deliver to that regions which are out of the water source?
No, that's one of the things we look at, because at the end of the day, we look at several variables. As I said it, we look at, now, one of the things we look at now is, if you look at those locations that tend to not have water, I need to take water there to grow the plants there, right? That will imply extra cost. That will imply probably extra piping. If you depend on kind of water system you are using, if you are using maybe water from from municipality, it might be different. If you are digging down into well or aquifers to get water, it might be different. If you are talking about probably getting water, probably it's a coastal area, but a dry area, it's going to be different. So part of what we do is to incorporate all these indices into our system, because at the end of the day, it will help us to see what would be the cost of such projects. And at the end of the day, help us to see, okay, is it going to be economical? Is it profitable? The policymakers and decision makers, can they really want to invest into this project? Because most of the time, some of these projects are carried out and you don't have an idea of what the implication of this project is going to be. But what we are saying is that with our system now, putting all these indices into place, all these parameters and matrices into place, you can predict what will happen to your system. You can predict, say, okay, based on these simulation values, whether it's going to be profitable, whether it's going to be profitable, and it's not going to be profitable, do we want to invest some amount of money into the project because we want to improve the livelihood of the people around? That's one of the things we are looking at. I think that's why, in fact, that's the reason of the project, because we can look at not just places with water, but places also without water, and what would be the implication of such project in such locations.
Thank you. Pierre had his hand up. I think that's going to be our last question for you, Peter.
Thank you, Peter, for the nice presentation. I have a couple of questions, and I don't know how Diana stole one of them from me, because she asked exactly.
I said the last question, not questions.
Okay, let
It's
me
okay.
just summarize them in one.
You can ask.
They are
okay,
interrelated,
Pierre.
so let me just make them as one question. Peter, I just wanted to find out the profit that you showed us, and there's there's some differences to really show that there's a specific region where there's a higher profit than another one. So in terms of rain, in terms of water, we know that water is dependent on regions or locations, and most specifically, like in South Africa, we know that you cannot really cultivate in the northern part because the rain is a bit less scarce as compared to the southern part. Like it's better, one will suggest that you cultivate in KZN instead of using Limpopo. So that is like a natural choice. And I saw in your presentation you said that there are some of the variations or variability that you look at, among which the weather conditions. So when you're talking about weather condition, those things, I assume that they are natural. When you say you are studying them, I don't know if you're taking into account to say that you are looking at things that are within the same weather conditions, or you are taking the money that is supposed to be used for like agriculture in Limpopo, for example. I'm talking Limpopo because you understand better. That's why I think we can assimilate to what you were saying here. So like that money that can be used in a place that's not where agriculture is not supposed to be used, obviously will be more compared to the place where, like KZN, where there's more rain and the condition for agriculture is favorable. So I don't know, did you take those things into consideration in this case? And because I need to summarize my question, and talking about those profits, do you think they can really be quite reproducible with too much certainty? Like, can you ascertain us, or like the government or people with capitals who want to invest into that it will be quite reproducible? So as when they invest in such a venture, they don't get to a loss, or they don't get to somewhere where they will get some disappointment. The reason why I'm asking that question is because of the first question, where I said, no, there are specific locations that are related to the rain and all those things. So that's how I can summarize my questions.
Okay, thank you. Piri. And that's the essence of the project, actually, right? Because what we want to achieve is to see whether it's worth investing into this project or not. If it's not worth investing, it's going to be profitable. And it's not going to be profitable, is government willing to spend money in that location? Now, the question sometimes is that it might be easy to import food from another part of the world, right, to your country. But then let's talk about food security for your country. If there is a war like what we have in Ukraine now, and Russia decides to shut off fuel supply, what happens to your country if the country decides to shut off food supply? So, but the question is that, at the end of the day, what we want to do, we want to have a tool that you can, when you look at the interaction of this water, food, and energy, can it tell you whether it's going to be profitable or not? And if it's not profitable, what are the variables you can change to make it profitable? And if you're going to change the variables, at the end of the day, to say that I'm going to be saying that it's certain that this is going to get us profit, I can't say for now, because we are still working on the model. But what we are hoping to get, because we are still working on optimization, and it's going to take several simulations, and it's a big team actually working together. So you're going to take several simulations and trying before we can say, okay, for certain, this project is what it is. But what we are hoping to get is that with our model, which we're trying to develop, you're able to, for certain, say, okay, if I invest some amount of money, amount of land, sow input from agriculture, sow input from fertilization, and several taking account of the weather condition of that location, you understand, and several other inputs. We have several inputs actually that are going to the system. Then you can see whether the project is going to be profitable or not, and is it worth investing into or not. Different locations, different indices, you understand, because I can't expect that when I'm talking about South Africa, what I have in Johannesburg is going to be what I'm going to have in Cape Town. It's going to be totally different. For now, we have to assume that a lot of the indices we are using or the variables we are using are the same in Uganda, but in real sense, the price in Johannesburg might be different from the price in Gabon. So if you want to do that, you have to take into consideration the cost of those different prices in those different locations in the system, and then model it, then provide a system or result that can help people to make decisions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. So we are halfway through the presentations for today, so maybe this is a time to quickly pause and say welcome to everybody and all our thank yous. So I want to, well, since there's people here who's visiting first time, let me introduce myself. I'm Andries Coetzee, the Director of the African Studies Center here at University of Michigan. And we're really happy that we have with us today many of the students in the AURA program. So if you're from the AURA program, wave so that we can, yeah, welcome. We're very happy to have all of you here. So AURA and UMAPS are the two most important programs through which the University of Michigan engages with the continent of Africa, right? So UMAPS, our UMAPS scholars all know UMAPS. It's a program that brings early career academic staff from universities in Africa to University of Michigan for a research fellowship. AURA is very similar, but it targets students rather than academic staff, and students at that intersection between undergraduate and postgraduate studies. So between bachelor's or master's degree or somewhere in that area. And AURA is also specifically targeted at engineering. So we're hoping that it can expand to other fields, but for the time being engineering. And we're really happy that this year the AURA and the UMAPS program are overlapping, and therefore we can have an opportunity to welcome everybody also to the African Studies Center. So welcome to our AURA students. So this is the last of the UMAPS colloquiums for our current cohort, the winter 2022 cohort. It no longer feels like winter, but it's the winter semester. So, just again, thank you to all of our UMAPS scholars that you have spent now already 4 months with us, some of you 5 months, and the rest will, all be packing up to go back home to Africa in a month. But thank you so much that you came. I've seen the people who presented today thanked their families and their home institutions. So yeah, also please say thank you to them from us, because your family sacrificed for you to be here, and your colleagues back home have to take up additional responsibilities so that you can come and spend time with us here at the University of Michigan, and then our university can benefit from your presence. So thank you to all of you and your colleagues and families. I would also be remiss if I don't thank the people who make the funding available to support programs like both UMAPS and AURA. For both of those programs, a lot of the, well, for UMAPS, a majority of the funding comes from the University of Michigan. The offices of the president and the provost have been supporting this program for 15, 16 years. And I think it's really wonderful that we can be at an institution where the upper administration realizes the value of a program like this for the University of Michigan and also for the scholars who participate in this. So I always have to say thank you to our president and provost for supporting the program. We also get funding from many other units on campus. The Department of Afro-American and African Studies has been supporting UMAPS program for many years. Individual faculty often contribute if they have funding in a grant or other sources of funding, and they want an opportunity to work with an African colleague. So thank you also to our faculty who support the program. And then we also have started to get donor funding over the last few years. So we really appreciate the fact also that donors are realizing the value of this program. That's relevant today because one of our donors, the Gwastala family, specifically funds our scholars from Kenya. So Purity is a Gwastala UMAP scholar funded through our Gwastala family grant. That's as far as the welcomes and the thank yous go. So the rest of today will have 2 more presentations, and then after that there's a reception. So you might have heard, or if you haven't, you might hear the caterer setting up around the corner. They've promised to be quiet, so hopefully they will be quiet enough that it won't interfere with our presentations today. So let's then move on to the second half of today, to our 3rd and 4th presentation. Let me just unlock my iPad. Our 3rd presenter for today is Gifty Buah. Gifty joins us from University of Ghana, and here at University of Michigan she works with Professor Kathleen Sienko in the College of Engineering. Gifty.
Thank you all for coming, and thank you, Andres, for the introduction. Today, I'm going to be sharing with you one of the researches that we are doing at the Sienko Research Group. And it is about a preliminary investigation to see if we can use how a person walks to tell whether they have a vestibular disorder or not by putting sensors on them while they are walking. My presentation is going to roughly follow this outline. First of all, you heard me mention a vestibular disorder. The vestibular system consists of a small bone in your ear, right there. Now, this bone, together with a couple of sensors, nerves in your ear, send signals to your brain. Now, what this does is that the signals sent to your brain tell you where you are positioned or your orientation. So, for example, if you are in a car with your eyes closed and the car is moving slowly and suddenly it starts moving fast or takes a bend, you can still realize that the movement has happened, even though your eyes is closed. Now, this is because there is a fluid in that system, the tubes that you see over there. Now, when these fluids move while your head is moving, your nerves are, the signals are sent to your brain through your nerves because of the movement of the fluid. Now, this system is really important, and if you have an infection or you hit your head during an accident, you will have the signals being sent wrongly, or the brain will not receive the right signals to get the interpretation that you need. So symptoms of having such a disorder with the system is that you start feeling dizzy. Some people complain of sudden dizziness, or you feel disoriented, or you can't focus on a particular object while you are moving your head. One person who had a vestibular disorder called a vestibular migraine describes her experience this way. I became very dizzy and extremely disoriented. When I sat still, I felt motion, a constant perpetual rocking, like being on a boat. My vision felt uncomfortable, strained, and I had difficulty concentrating. Now, this is just one person. Several people have been incapacitated, have left their jobs because they are facing this issue. Now, even though there is research that shows that vestibular disorders are really prevalent, there are very few medical practitioners that are able to screen for vestibular disorders and diagnose them. The situation is similar in both United States and sub-Saharan Africa. Now, this is really bad because most people are not being diagnosed of vestibular disorders, and they live with them and are untreated. So, what has vestibular disorders got to do with gait? If I sprain my ankle, I would definitely walk in a way that I don't put too much pressure on that ankle, so you'll see that there's something wrong with me because I'm in pain. It's the same thing here. Because the vestibular system helps you with your balance, if there is a fault with it, you will likely walk in such a way to compensate for your dizziness or your feeling of disorientation. Actually, when medical practitioners are screening for vestibular disorders, what they do is that as part of the test, they will let you walk, and then they will observe the way you walk, and if there are any differences from walking from normal, then they will be able to use to predict that you have a vestibular disorder. The problem with this is that there are certain minute changes whilst a person walks that are not visible to the eye. So a medical practitioner may lose that kind of information and will misdiagnose you. And we think that we can use machine learning to notice these small changes and be able to predict if a person has a vestibular disorder or not. So our research objective is twofold. The first one is to see if we can use machine learning to predict if a person has a vestibular disorder or not. The second objective, which is as a result of what we found in the first one, was to check how robust that machine learning model is in actually identifying people with vestibular disorders in the presence of other disorders that will also affect how they walk. Several work have been done on this. People have looked at different data to use to predict whether a person has a vestibular disorder or not. Some people have used the symptoms that a patient has. Others have used clinical test scores. So a patient goes to the doctor, the test scores that they have, then we use machine learning to predict whether they have vestibular disorder or not. Others have also used the reflex eye movement. As I said, when you have a vestibular disorder, it's difficult to focus on an object when you are moving your head. So we can use that movement to predict whether you have vestibular disorder or not. Then we have gait parameters. Gait is just how a person walks. And this is the category that we fall into. Several people have done work on this, but what they have done is that the sensors they use, they put them on only specific parts of the body. What we are doing is we are looking at full body sensors to predict whether a person has a vestibular disorder or not. Now for our research, we have 30 participants. We had 15 of them with vestibular disorders and the other 15 without vestibular disorders. Their details are here. And what we did was that each participant had 2 exercises. So first of all, a participant will walk at their normal pace. And secondly, they will also walk as fast as they could without running. And while they were doing that, we had the sensors. Now, the sensors are really small. We call them inertial measurement units. And what they measure is acceleration and angular velocity. So it is not a bulky sensor that you have with wires all over you. So this is the placement of the sensors. We had each participant wear 13 sensors on the head, arms, the wrist, the thigh, and then the shank, and then the foot. We had one at the lower back and then the upper back as well. So we were collecting the acceleration and angular velocity data as they were walking. This is an example of a nice looking graph here. And what you are seeing is actually the data collected from one of the sensors placed on the left foot of a participant. Now, if you imagine yourself walking, you see I lift one leg, put it in front of the other like that. So if you see one sensor here, your leg is sometimes up in the air and then on the ground. That is why you are seeing this up and down movement. We, of course, want to use that data to tell if a person has vestibular disorder or not. But we didn't use this data directly. What we did was that out of this data, we want to extract features that are important to us. One of such features is the number of strides you take during that walk. So we had to find the stationary points to be able to count the number of strides a person actually takes. So this is just one of the features we extracted for the foot. Now we have our features extracted for all the 13 IMUs. We have to train the model to be able to identify if a person has a vestibular disorder or not. So the model, I won't go into details with all the math, but what it simply does is similar to how we learn in school. The teacher gives you examples while teaching you, and then expects that you would learn from the examples, and then in the test, you will use the knowledge from the examples to answer a question. It's really similar. We have our features extracted. That's the data that we have here. And we split that data into 2. So part of the participants are in the training data sets. The other part is in the test data set. What we do is that we make sure that the training data set is more than the test data set. Of course, the more examples you see, the more questions you'll be able to answer. So with this training data set, we give the data set to the model that we have created. And what the model does is that it checks the relationship between the features and then the category that a person actually falls into. So for the training data, we add the features together with the categories that a person falls into, whether they are having a vestibular disorder or not. So the model studies the relationship between the features and checks, oh, if a person has 10 steps or 10 strides, then they are vestibular. If the person has 8 steps or 8 strides, then they are not vestibular. So with that, after looking at all the features and learning the relationships between them, we pass the test data, which in this case is the exam that the student has to do. We pass the test data into the model that has been produced. In the test data, we don't include the category that a person falls into. So we are expecting that the model will use the knowledge from the training data to predict if a person has a vestibular disorder or not. And the output the model gives is actually a value, and it's a probability between 0 or 1. So depending on the value that we get, the model will be able to place the participant in vestibular or control. The control is someone who doesn't have a vestibular disorder. Now, for the results, our model was able to differentiate to a higher extent people who had vestibular disorders and people who did not. Here we can see that we have a graph here. The blue part shows people who did not have vestibular disorders, and then the orange part shows the people with vestibular disorders. For our model, we had a threshold of 0.5. So for the blue, we see that majority of them are below 0.5. For the orange, we have majority of them in the above 0.5. This overlap you see here, for the blue part you see that is greater than 0.5. It means that the model predicted that someone who is healthy actually had a vestibular disorder. And for the part of the orange part that you see that is below 0.5, it's a person with a vestibular disorder that the model predicted as being healthy. So we don't have a perfect system, but in assessing the performance, what we use is called AUROC. And the higher the value, it means that it's a value between 0 and 1. The higher the value, it means that your model is good. So we had an AUROC of 0.81. And one other interesting finding we got was that the features we extracted from the IMU placed on the left arm had the best ability to differentiate between people with vestibular disorders or not. What does this imply? It means that looking at the small size of the IMU, it means we could possibly have a device that you wear on your arm, and you would be able to tell by just doing your normal walking activities whether you have a vestibular disorder or not. The system is not perfect yet, and if we improve it, we can possibly get that result. So be on the lookout for probably a device you could wear like that. Now, if you remember, the second objective was that we would have to test the model we've created that had a good performance in the presence of another disorder that also affects the gait, to check if the model will really be able to identify vestibular disorders. So we looked at multiple sclerosis. Now, multiple sclerosis is an autoimmune disease in which your own immune system affects your nerves. And depending on the type of nerves that it affects, you can have very similar symptoms to vestibular disorders, and it also affects your gait. So we had 6 participants, and these participants had multiple sclerosis. We went through the same process of having them do the walking exercise and then extracting features from the data that we collected from them. And with the result, we are just superimposing the result for the people with multiple sclerosis on the previous graph that you saw. And you see that they are all over the place, right? So the model couldn't really categorize a person with multiple sclerosis or group them into a particular spot. So we have almost half of them being in multiple vestibular, and then the other being in the controls. Now, this means that if we are using our model, for example, you are wearing that device on your arm, in reality, we know that people who go to the hospital are not just healthy people or people with vestibular diseases. They come there with all sorts of symptoms. So if someone comes with multiple sclerosis, the model will sometimes predict that the person has a vestibular disorder, which is misdiagnosis, and it's wrong. So even though the model could identify people with vestibular disorders and all, if we brought another disorder that had similar symptoms, our model will not perform well. What are the lessons from this? We've all heard of machine learning, artificial intelligence, and we've heard that it can help solve so many problems. But in this case, if we are solving a problem like this, we also have to really consider real-world scenarios, as in a person will go to the hospital with symptoms that look very similar to vestibular, but then may not be vestibular. And then also, we can see that from the results from the healthy and then the vestibular people, we could actually have some degree of differentiation. The same tools that we have can be used to predict other diseases, not just healthy or vestibular. Now, the limitation is that, as I said, when you are learning, the more examples you get, the better you are at solving a problem. So our sample size had only 30 people, 15 vestibular, and then 15 healthy people. And then our multiple sclerosis were just 6. To train a better model, we need to give the model more information that it can learn from. So we require that an increase in our population size to be able to do that. Future work should look into enlarging our population size and also using what we call a multi-class classifier. So with that, when we are training the model, instead of using just people with vestibular disorders or people who are healthy, we add the people with multiple sclerosis so that the model can differentiate the features between all the 3 people, and then it will be able to better predict if a person has vestibular disorder, multiple sclerosis, or a healthy person. I would really like to thank the Computer Engineering Department of University of Ghana for allowing me come here to do the program. And I'd also like to thank University of Michigan and the UMAPS program as well. Thank you, you've made my stay really amazing. And then I would like to thank Professor Kathleen Sienko and the Sienko Research Group. The experience has been amazing. The kind of knowledge that I get, I am a computer engineer and I'm working with the mechanical engineering department. And I had to learn so many new things and I've been helped in that regard. I would like to thank Safa, Jenna Waynes, and Wendy Carenda. She is a physiotherapist and she helped with the recruitment of the participants. And Safa, I've been working closely with her. Jenna is with the Electrical and Computer Engineering Department here in University of Michigan. I'd also like to thank my UMAPS cohort. You've made the stay really amazing. Thank you for all the wonderful days and nights. And I'd also like to thank my family, my husband, and my extended family who have felt my absence. And here we are. This is my host, Professor Kathleen Sienko, and this is Safa, the lady I've been working really closely with. Medase.
Thank you, Gifty. So, question time. Pierre, and then last one behind him, and then Usisipo. Oh, and well, okay, so Pierre, Laston, Usisipo, and Fitsum.
Thank you, Gifty, for the nice presentation. Just a quick question. You motivated the reason of your data collection, how you chose I assume that you were having some restriction in order for you to get a large sample. But specifically, why did you try to focus on female than male? Because it looks like you exclude male from your sampling. Why your data collection, especially for the MS, you see, like you are trying to exclude male, then what is the reason behind that? That's my quick question.
Okay, thanks for the question. We are not excluding men. So with the recruitment, it's like people have to volunteer to be participants, right? And once you volunteer, we take you through some of the things you would be going, and you have to consent that you really want to take part in the research. So it wasn't our doing. The people who volunteered to take part in the research were just more female than male. Okay. Yeah.
Last one.
Thank you, Gifty, for this wonderful presentation. And of course, I find your topic very interesting and important for all of us. So I should commend you for that. I also had, I am last one from the University of Malawi, by the way, UMAPS fellow. I also wanted to get insight in terms of the sample, particularly I was looking at the age range, so probably maybe it's also about those who volunteered. But maybe if you could also shed light.
The age?
Yes, the age range. I see 13 or 16 to 50 something.
Yeah.
Yeah, so beyond the sampling issues, I also wanted to just get how convinced or how satisfied you are with the AU ROC of 0.81. I don't know, I just wanted you to comment in terms of the literature or the practice, what's the best that we could get. Probably it's a 1. So how, what's your comment basically for the 0.81? Would you do anything to improve on it? I guess this is the more the better. So would you do anything to improve on it? Is it maybe an issue of the sample size or maybe some of the parameters you have in your model? Basically, are you satisfied or you are working to improve on that indicator? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for the question. For the age, we see that we have 58 years, 56, and most of them were in the 50s. Now that's because as you grow older, your nerves are actually, they've done so much work and they deteriorate, right? So people with vestibular disorders who actually go to the hospitals are mostly people who are older. And that is why you don't see any, for example, 16 or 17, yeah. So that's the reason for the age that we have here. We just have more people with vestibular disorders that are older. And with the AUROC of 0.81, there are other works that have had AUROCs as high as 0.95. And as I said, the work is preliminary, and that's why it's just an introductory research to see what we can do with this data and use that data for larger population. So even though 0.81 is good, we are not satisfied with it. And that is why we have future work to include more population so that our model can probably learn better. And I should also mention that the 0.81 was not, we had different models, right? And we also considered the different positionings of the IMUs. some of the positions that we had for the IMUs had lower AUROCs. The 0.81 was for the left arm, and that was the best performing one. So we would work on including more people and then training. Hopefully, we will get a better model with that.
I feel really bad for doing it, but we're already 10 minutes behind schedule and the caterers are setting up. So I'm going to cut off the question period here. I'm sorry, Usisipo and Fitsum. Please forgive me. Please stay for the reception afterwards and ask Gifty your questions then. Thank you, Gifty. Our last presenter today and our last presenter in the UMAPS Colloquium series for the current Colloquium, the current UMAPS cohort, is Diana Mbatudde. Diana comes to us from Aga Khan University in Uganda, and here at University of Michigan, Diana works with Masi Mutumba in the School of Nursing. Diana.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Andres, for the introductions. So my name is Diana Mbatudde. I'm a UMAPS scholar from Aga Khan University, Uganda, School of Nursing and Midwifery. I'm thrilled to be discussing with you a project we are working on with Professor Masi, Dr. Masi Mutumba, that has to do with the effectiveness of an essential emergency care model at low and middle level health facilities in Uganda. I should say most of the project is still a work in progress. So please feel free to give all the feedback you think you can give because the biggest chunk of the project still remains undone, okay? So a little bit about Uganda. This is Uganda and located in the eastern part of Africa. It's that one in orange, neighbored by Kenya and Tanzania. That's Kampala, a small city, quite busy, and it's a beautiful country, evergreen. So please take time to pass by, but I'll stop there with a commercial break. Okay, so what are we going to look at in this presentation? Basically, we want to look at a small background about the study. What's the problem? What are the purpose and objectives? Methods, preliminary results. We should look at the conclusion and some acknowledgements. But before we go through that, has anyone ever found themselves in an emergency room, whether as a patient, as a family member with a patient, or as a friend? Okay, so I think we can all relate. And we've all have seen something like that, somebody being wheeled and people racing. And yeah, so this is where the environment we survive in most of our work. But before we go through the details, I want to build a tempo for this study, and we are going to particularly look first at two typical cases of emergency situations in Uganda. And let's first look at Prima. These are not her real names, but the situation is real. 23-year-old young woman, known patient with sickle cell disease. And one time, Prima developed a painful crisis from her home where she lived with her parents. And in the middle of the night, the family was forced to carry her to the hospital, to the nearby health facility, which was the health center 4. We are going to see the classifications of the health centers as we move along. It was about 7 kilometers away from their home. She had difficulty breathing, she was screaming in pain, and she was pretty restless, so they couldn't go through the night. So Prima somehow, they managed to get to the hospital, not by ambulance or by car, but by a motorcycle taxi, very common in Uganda. And once at the health facility, when you go through that ordeal, you reach the hospital, the health facility next to you, and they're like, you know what, we can't manage you here. You have to continue to the next big health facility where you can receive care. They needed an ambulance, but it wasn't available at the moment. And after 2 hours, they managed to contact a relative who came and picked them and took them to the health facility, to the bigger hospital. And at 3 a.m., They got into the emergency room of the big hospital, but unfortunately, Prima was no more. And we're going to talk a lot about death and dying, so please, just keep calm. Sorry. Could Prima have been saved? Okay. Is there anything that could have been done at the first level facility to save Prima's life? Maybe if the first facility they went to, they were able to get help of emergency form, maybe Prima could have been saved. But also, there is a possibility that Prima's condition might have been so bad. She's a patient with sickle cell disease, and it's known that most of them, 50% might not be able to survive up to their 50th birthday. But I remember these words from Prima's mother very well. Prima was a girl we grew up in the same village with. And I remember her mother saying so well that my daughter was a fighter. If only she had received care at the first health facility, probably she would have made it, okay? So let's look at a typical case number 2, and that is Joshua. Joshua, I happen to have taken care of Joshua when I was a third-year nursing student for my undergraduate. So Joshua is a 15-year-old high school student. One time as he's coming from school, he was hit by a boda. So the boda took Prima to hospital, to the health facility, but then a boda hit Joshua. I think we understand the demographic. And then Good Samaritans, we normally call them that in Uganda, or medically we refer to them as lay first responders, helped get Joshua out of the trench. And one driver offered to drive Joshua to a tertiary level health facility. This is still the big hospital, okay? And this was after an argument whether they should take Joshua to the nearby health facility, and they all agreed they would not get help. So they continued on the road. And in an hour, Joshua gets to the hospital, but was pronounced dead 10 minutes later. He had lost a lot of blood, okay? Could Joshua have been saved, okay? And could he have gotten a chance to finish high school? Maybe yes, if they were able to access care as immediately as they could to stop the bleeding. It was as simple as stopping the bleeding, okay? Maybe not. Maybe the injury was too severe. Sorry, I'm a medical person, so sometimes we're like, maybe this guy could not survive. That is true in every day that we work. So these typical cases happen every day among children. We see mothers running into health facilities with children who have collapsed, okay? We see senior citizens show up in hospital with stroke and all sorts of problems, young adults. And when you come from many of the African countries, so many of them don't survive. A few lucky ones survive. When you face an emergency situation, we've looked at how it might be challenging to actually get to the point where you access the emergency care. So sometimes it is a point of luck, okay? So 20 to 45 million people die annually due to acute life-threatening conditions. And acute meaning they happen suddenly, okay? And so they have to be dealt with suddenly. So 90% of these mortalities, unfortunately, are in low-income or middle-income countries, okay? And most of them are contributed to by road traffic accidents, especially in Africa with rapid urbanization and stuff. There are a lot of road traffic accidents, acute exacerbations of non-chronic diseases, for example, diabetes and hypertension, maternal complications, talk of postpartum hemorrhage, bleeding a lot after birth, and those sorts of things. And these we all know they are being contributed to by poor infrastructure, health funding, and human resources in both availability and training, okay? So when we look at these charts are just showing us how big the burden is, and I think we can all agree there is a very big burden in Africa, East Asia, and the East Mediterranean. And then the other one is the DALIs, okay, I'll call it. I'll cut it short. And you can see most of these are being contributed to by low-income countries. And then when we come to the continents, you have Africa, Southeast Asia, and then that, and least in the more developed world. But then fast forward, let's first look at what emergency care is. This is medical care provided to patients with acute life-threatening conditions in order to avert impending death or disability. We are trying to say, let's keep this person alive until they are able to get definitive care. It is very time sensitive. It is symptom-based. So if you're breathing badly, I will not first think of what is causing the bad breathing, but how do I ensure that this person breathes better before I actually treat the underlying condition, okay? It is both basic, which is now has a new term called essential, and it can be advanced. And for the most part of this project, we are going to look at emergency care in terms of how basic it can be, the basic care we can provide to patients with acute life-threatening conditions. And basic emergency care is a very big component of universal health coverage, okay? Good health for all. And it is time sensitive, and studies have shown that it has the ability to reduce 50% of the mortalities due to acute life-threatening conditions. While advanced emergency care, the most of the one we see in developed countries, can contribute 25%, okay? So what are the components of basic emergency care? We want to keep the airway clear. We want to stop a convulsion. We want to stop a high temperature. We want to treat shock and bleeding, altered conscious states, and just in case your heart stops abruptly, can we stimulate it and it starts beating again, okay? So in 2007, the World Health Assembly resolution was signed to improve emergency care systems in low-income countries, okay? And this led to the development of a number of capacity-building programs under World Health Organization, African Federation of Emergency Care, and INRCD Global Health, just to mention a few. A number of them have done that. And they were developed critical emergency care programs. And for example, in Uganda, the programs are fairly new, with the first cohort of graduates in emergency and critical care nurses graduating in 2015, and then emergency care physicians in 2019. I was actually among the third cohort of graduates of the INRCD Global Health Fund for emergency and critical care. And when we look at the World Health Organization Emergency Care Systems Framework, it clearly stipulates that whenever an emergency condition happens, we should be having a possibility of either delivering the care to the patient or get the patient to where they can get the care as quickly as possible. But as we've seen, there are a number of challenges that happen within low-resource settings. So what's the problem? Most of these capacity building initiatives to improve emergency care systems in Uganda particularly have concentrated at tertiary health facilities, okay? And when I mean tertiary health facilities, I'm meaning the big hospitals, which are usually very far away and inaccessible to the biggest chunk of the population, okay? So for example, we're going to look at Uganda's healthcare delivery system. For example, we've seen the point of moving to the nearer health facility, and then you have to travel another 30 kilometers without even the best underlying care. And this has made mortalities have remained high and poor patient outcomes. For example, Uganda has the highest mortality due to road traffic injuries, okay? So part of these contributing factors, we've seen long travel distances and the absence of models of care at the lower health facilities. So when we look at the healthcare delivery system in Uganda, we have health centers right from a health center 1 that is at village level. This one has no structure. A health center 2, health center 3 at sub-county level. And we start seeing emergency services start happening at a district hospital and even at a limited scale. And which means that these health facilities that are actually more accessible to most of the population remain under-resourced in terms of emergency care. And we're thinking, could we provide could we test a model that could actually improve the provision of emergency services at lower level health facilities. And these, ideally, you're supposed to be referred like that in case they can't manage you at a lower facility. But considering the time sensitiveness of emergency care, it means you might not be able to get there in time. So the purpose of this study is ideally to test a basic emergency care model adaptable at lower level health facilities in low resource settings in Uganda, benchmarking on the WHO emergency care systems framework. So the objectives of this study, which are also the phases, because in each phase we have particular objectives. The first phase we conducted a scoping review of literature on models of emergency care at lower level health facilities. And when I talk about models of emergency care, we are looking at a framework, a structure that deals with who does what should be done, and when should it be done, okay? And to evaluate, in the second phase, we're looking at evaluating the effectiveness of the healthcare delivery model in Uganda currently. And lastly, we shall be able to test the model. So phase 1 leads to phase 2, and phase 2 leads to phase 3. And in this study, we are using a framework, a research framework by the Johannesburg Institute that talks about generating evidence synthesis. This is where we are. We transfer the evidence, implement it, and then the cycle continues. So let's look at the first phase, which is the scoping review. We've managed to, following that protocol, we've managed to search data from PubMed, CINAHL, and Embase, done the abstract and then full text review, and then been able to do some analysis. In phase 3, phase 2, which is undergoing, we are going to collect data from 30 health facilities in Uganda by reviewing medical records. And here we shall look at patient demographics, pathways to care, length of stay, mortality and morbidity outcomes, and then the readiness of the health facility to provide emergency care. And then in phase 3, which hasn't yet happened, we shall test the model of care using the results in both from phase 1 and phase 2. So far in phase 1, we've been able to retrieve 2,555 articles. And out of those, after tight and abstract review, we ended up with 446 articles, which underwent a full text review with a team of 3 people. And out of those, we so far selected 36 articles that are appropriate to our study, okay? And out of these, so far what we are seeing, most of the EC structures are pretty new. Of course, trauma and pediatric systems predominate, and the systems also are mostly centralized. There is a very big reliance on lay first responders, and so many studies have analyzed the benefit of actually training lay people in providing the first contact care in case of an emergency situation. Things like doing CPR, where you see people pumping their chest, stuff like that. Yeah. And then incorporating mobile health in situations where you don't have a call center, for example, use of WhatsApp and different applications to actually communicate, okay? And then with human resources, we're looking at many training modalities, task shifting, because most of these health facilities are not actually equipped with the medical doctors. There might be nurses, so there might be need to shift tasks here and there in the overall model in phase 2. Of course, the barriers are equipment and broken referral systems. But when we look at basic emergency care, something as simple as putting an airway piece of $2 in a patient which can be reused can go a long way in saving a life than not having it. And then various protocols that have been implemented along the way that we are also trying to liaise and see how we can merge these ones. So in summary, emergency conditions and their management are a big burden in low and middle income countries. Our initiatives have concentrated at tertiary care facilities, and there is a need to develop a model of care that addresses emergency care needs at accessible health facilities. And we're seeing that this model of care should address common patient conditions, the role of lay first responders, and resource or cost effectiveness of the model, which we think we're going to test in phase 2. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening. And before I go, I want to thank the various people who have made this possible. The African Studies Center and with the funding from the President's Office. Thank you so much for making this possible for us to be here. Aga Khan University, the Dean, Associate Dean, and all faculty, thank you for allowing me to be here. And I think the one person who are like, will not give you any work, you just go and do your things. And then my mentor, Dr. Mercy Mutumba, administration, Professor Andres, Dr. Enrique, Tay, Pam, thank you all for the work. Dr. Chris Fick, I really appreciate the writing workshops. The review team, Peter Nyakuni and JB Asimwe, UMAPS scholars, you guys rock, you're the best. And to my dear mother, who is always available and supportive to take care of the boy and me whenever I need her. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Diana. Question time. So, Fitzum and Usisipu, if you have a question now, then you can go first. No, anybody, questions for Diana?
Okay. Thank you so much, Diana, for your, inciting presentation. It's, again, very, very touching. Of course, you warned us that we should not feel that way because you live in it. Mm-hmm. But my question, I hope it's not a very not a very difficult one to you, because what you are presenting is not just in Uganda. We see that across Africa. So my question is it about the model, or it's about the willingness in terms of our leaders to change things? Is it really about the model or our leaders to change things? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Savius, for the question. Yeah, is it about the model or is it the willingness? And I think, is it also about the resources to change things? And I think as academicians and researchers, what sometimes we need to do is to actually show our leaders that things can be done. Because when you look at some of these initiatives that we're trying to put in, it's not something very abstract, but we're trying to provide information to the policymakers that you see it doesn't need to be done this way. If we can test it and prove that it can actually work, then maybe we have a starting point to talk. And you're right, most of Africa's problems are similar. And that's why we are even starting off, and many other low-income countries, that's why we are starting off with a scoping review to look at how similar are these situations, and what if this model can actually be adopted in Uganda? Could it be adopted somewhere else? Yeah. Thank you.
Other questions? Usisipo.
Thank you so much, Diana, for your presentation. I know that you are registered at UNISA at Johannesburg University. I just want to find out, you're talking about Uganda. What is your contribution at UNISA since you are registered there? If you're looking at the strategy for UNISA, what is your contribution? What is your work contributing to UNISA?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So what is my work contributing to UNISA? Of course, UNISA is an academic institution, and me being a student, my research output is actually contributing to the research output of UNISA as an institution. If you're looking at what I'm contributing to South Africa per se, for now, I'm not sure of that, but I'm contributing to the fact that we are testing something that could be adoptable, maybe in the underserved areas of South Africa as well.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Okay. All right.
Let me ask something, Diana. So I was really, I mean, as Sevias also said, you told us not to be too worried, upset about the personal stories, but I thought that was a really effective way of introducing the talk, of showing us that you're not just talking about numbers, but about people's lives. And I was just struck by how different the experiences are of those two people you talked about. I mean, you started the presentation asking, who of you have been to the emergency room? And I have, 2 or 3 times in my life. And it was just so radically a different experience.
Yeah.
So I just wonder, I mean, it kind of connects to the questions you've got, and how universal is these experiences? How place-bound are they? I mean, are they the same in Uganda and South Africa? But, what about Michigan or rural Pennsylvania?
Yeah. So I should say how universal these experiences. If I'm talking as a health worker in Uganda, I don't think this is a very different experience from so many health workers in Uganda. And actually, what the scoping review is showing us is that there are a lot of similarities, especially from qualitative studies, on how people report their experiences with accessing emergency care in different countries. When you talk about the US, I feel if you've lived in Ann Arbor or Michigan, the uptown bit, for most of your life, you might not really understand the experiences. But I'm thinking even someone from rural places in the United States can maybe somehow relate on how it might be an issue of luck for you to get emergency care within the location that you live. So I think that experiences are really universal in a sense that there are so many things that are similar in so many developing countries that so many people have to beat against in order to stay alive. That's what I should say.
Thank you very much, Diana.
Thank you. Thank you all.
So we have one small part of the program remaining before we will go around the corner for a reception. Every person who participates in the UMAPS program, when they graduate from the program, they get a plaque to note their completion of the program, and you've heard mention of the writing program led by Dr. Chris Feek. They also get a certificate saying they completed the writing program. Now, usually all our UMAP scholars in a cohort start at the same time and end at the same time. This is not usual times because COVID. So our cohort started at 3 different times this year and therefore ended 3 different times. And one member of our cohort, Gifty Buah, is finishing her 5 months very soon. It's going home in a couple of days. So Gifty, thank you very much for spending time with us, and congratulations. And that's the end of the formal part of the program. Please stay around and join us for the reception around the corner. Thank you.